Welcome to Avoidant Decoded, where we uncover the hidden psychology behind avoidant love, emotional distance, and the subtle behaviors that reveal what words often cannot. If you want to understand what an avoidant truly feels beneath the silence and guarded exterior, you're in the right place. And if you value these deep insights, consider becoming a member of Avoidant Decoded and join us as we continue decoding the emotions, patterns, and quiet signs behind avoidant relationships. What if an avoidant's deepest declaration of love isn't something they say, but something they finally stop running from? When they begin choosing your presence over their need for distance, sharing what they normally hide, and protecting the connection instead of protecting themselves, something profound has changed. Their love may never be loud or dramatic, but when an avoidant finally feels safe enough to stay, their quiet actions can reveal a depth of devotion words could never express. People often think of love as something obvious and impossible to miss. They picture intense chemistry, dramatic gestures, emotional confessions, and moments so powerful that they demand attention. But some of the deepest kinds of love are much quieter. They live in ordinary companionship, reliable presence, emotional calm, and the feeling that being beside someone simply feels like home. For someone with avoidant patterns, that kind of quiet connection can communicate more than 100 romantic speeches. Lasting commitment usually doesn't grow from constant intensity or endless reassurance. It develops when emotional safety becomes stronger than the fear of losing independence. Someone who has spent years relying primarily on themselves may not feel closer because another person becomes more emotionally intense. They often move closer when they discover that they can experience powerful feelings without being controlled, overwhelmed, or consumed by them. Many avoidant people learned early in life that emotional closeness could come with discomfort. Intimacy may have been associated with criticism, pressure, emotional demands, loss of control, or having their boundaries ignored. As a result, distance became a form of protection. It doesn't always mean they don't want love. Sometimes it means they learned that keeping people at a safe distance feels less threatening than becoming deeply dependent on them. Then they encounter someone who doesn't try to tear those defenses down. Someone who respects their personal space, understands that trust takes time, and doesn't treat every moment of withdrawal as a personal attack. Gradually, something unfamiliar begins to develop, peace inside a relationship. That peace can become the foundation of commitment. The safer they feel while remaining independent, the easier it becomes for them to naturally include you in their private world. You don't have to chase them, persuade them, or repeatedly prove that you're worthy of their love. What matters more is creating a relationship in which their defenses don't have to stay switched on all the time. With an avoidant, emotional security is often built through consistency rather than intensity. They pay attention to how you behave during disagreements. They remember whether you respect their boundaries. They notice what happens when they become quiet. They watch your patterns over time. When you remain emotionally grounded instead of responding to their distance with panic, pressure, or demands, something begins shifting internally. They start learning that love doesn't automatically mean chaos. Intimacy doesn't necessarily mean losing themselves. Being close to another person doesn't have to cost them their freedom. That realization can be deeply healing. Eventually, they may begin sharing parts of themselves they once kept hidden. They might message you more frequently, tell you little details about their day, invite you into their routines, or become comfortable simply spending time beside you. Something as simple as a morning message, an invitation to see them, or a rare admission about something they're afraid of can carry enormous meaning. From the outside, these actions may look small, but for someone who has spent years protecting their emotional independence, they can represent major acts of trust. What they're really communicating may be something like, "I trust you enough to let you closer." That can mean much more than a dramatic declaration of love. Their commitment may also look different from the kind of romance people usually expect. It may not involve constant affection, non-stop communication, or repeated promises about forever. Instead, commitment may appear through reliability. When an avoidant genuinely chooses a relationship, they're not merely agreeing to have feelings for someone. They're choosing to remain present even when their instinct tells them to retreat. They're allowing another person to see parts of themselves they've spent years protecting because they have decided the relationship is worth the vulnerability. That decision can take time. It can feel uncomfortable. But once it becomes sincere, it can run surprisingly deep. For an avoidant, Forever may not sound like endless promises. It may look like staying. When they allow you into their world, they're doing more than sharing their time. They're challenging years of emotional conditioning that taught them to protect themselves through distance. Their affection may be understated, but understated does not mean shallow. They may show love through reliability instead of intensity, understanding instead of control, and peace instead of emotional drama. Commitment becomes a gradual movement from fear toward trust, from isolation toward companionship, and from constantly defending themselves toward believing that perhaps they are finally safe enough to remain. One of the clearest signs of this transformation is when they begin choosing your presence instead of automatically choosing distance. Avoidant behavior is often associated with pulling away, but withdrawal isn't always proof that someone doesn't care. For some people, emotional closeness activates a powerful fear of losing autonomy. Intimacy can feel like a threat to their freedom, so retreat becomes their automatic method of managing difficult emotions. But when that pattern begins changing, something significant may be happening. They start moving toward connection instead of always escaping from it. The change rarely happens overnight. There may still be days when they want closeness, and other days when they need space. They can feel caught between two competing needs, wanting to be loved while fearing that love will eventually consume them. What helps resolve that conflict is experiencing a relationship where intimacy and independence can exist together. When they discover that being close to you doesn't require surrendering their identity, their mind and body can gradually relax. They learn that being with someone doesn't mean losing control. It can simply mean sharing life while still remaining an individual. At first, these changes may be almost invisible. They stay a little longer. They talk a little more. They don't immediately leave after spending time together. They become comfortable sitting beside you without feeling responsible for filling every silence. Those ordinary moments can reveal a major internal shift. Their nervous system is gradually learning that connection can feel peaceful instead of threatening. The tension that once accompanied closeness begins turning into comfort. The automatic urge to escape becomes curiosity. Your presence slowly becomes associated with calm rather than pressure. That is a powerful psychological change. When an avoidant begins genuinely wanting you around, it doesn't necessarily mean they suddenly need constant contact. Instead, they may be discovering how comforting it is to have someone nearby whom they trust. You become a person they can relax around, instead of someone they feel compelled to escape from. Their defenses usually don't disappear because someone aggressively confronts them. Those defenses soften through repeated experiences, showing them that they don't need to stay guarded every moment. You might notice them reaching for your hand, sharing a thought they would normally keep private, or becoming completely comfortable sitting beside you in silence. These gestures can appear ordinary, but for someone who once depended heavily on emotional distance, they can represent tremendous progress. They're learning that safety doesn't only exist when they're alone. Safety can also exist in another person's presence. And seeking closeness doesn't mean they suddenly stop needing independence. Healthy intimacy allows both needs to coexist. They can have personal space without turning that space into emotional separation. They can be close without feeling controlled. They can reveal themselves without feeling completely exposed. They're no longer searching for freedom by running away from connection. They're discovering that freedom can also exist inside a healthy connection. This is what makes the stage so meaningful. Their love becomes less about proving something and more about peaceful companionship. They choose to be near you because they genuinely want your presence, not because they are being pressured, chased, or obligated. Their quiet loyalty, their comfort around you, and their willingness to share ordinary moments may become some of the strongest signs that their feelings have matured. You may have become connected to their sense of inner peace, and when they begin showing you the internal chaos they normally keep hidden, that can represent an even deeper level of trust. Because allowing you to see beneath their calm exterior means they're not simply inviting you into their life anymore, they're inviting you into themselves. For much of their lives, people with avoidant tendencies may learn to treat intense emotions as something dangerous. Vulnerability can feel like an opening through which they could be hurt, while self-reliance feels like the safest way to survive. So they construct an internal world that appears controlled from the outside, even when there is considerable uncertainty underneath. Behind that composed exterior may be fears they rarely discuss, insecurities they struggle to admit, and a deep sense of emotional isolation. Allowing another person into that private space requires enormous trust. So when an avoidant begins showing you what is genuinely happening inside them, it isn't necessarily a casual conversation. It may be one of the deepest expressions of commitment they know how to give. In their own quiet way, they're communicating that they no longer see you as someone they need to defend themselves against. They see you as someone who can witness their truth without turning it into a weapon. Avoidant people often develop emotional defenses because unpredictability feels threatening. They learn to contain their feelings and appear composed, even when they're struggling internally. Their need for distance isn't always a rejection of love. Sometimes it is simply the coping strategy they learned long ago. So when they finally stop hiding everything behind that calm exterior, something meaningful has changed. Their urge to withdraw is becoming less powerful because they've discovered that your presence doesn't make their inner world more chaotic. Instead, you may actually help them feel calmer inside it. It often begins with small disclosures. They might tell you about something painful from their past, admit a fear they've never discussed, or reveal a personal experience they usually keep private. To another person, that might seem like a normal conversation. To an avoidant, each revelation can represent another piece of a protective wall coming down. As they experience acceptance instead of judgment, they begin learning something they may have struggled to believe for years. They don't have to be perfect to deserve love. Vulnerability doesn't automatically lead to rejection. Being understood doesn't necessarily mean being controlled. Letting someone close doesn't always end in pain. Their vulnerability may not always come out smoothly. They might hesitate, struggle to find the right words, change the subject, become uncomfortable, or even apologize for showing emotion. They may not know how to explain exactly what they're experiencing, but underneath that awkwardness is something significant. They want to be known. At this stage, they aren't working as hard to appear untouchable. Understanding becomes more important than admiration. They don't necessarily need you to believe they're flawless. They need to know that you can recognize their imperfections and still remain emotionally safe. Opening up can also become a quiet test of trust. Someone who has spent years expecting rejection may wonder what will happen when you see the parts of them they consider difficult, vulnerable, or broken. Your response matters. When their honesty is met with patience instead of criticism, they begin developing a different understanding of love. They start discovering that love doesn't require hiding every weakness. Eventually, their vulnerability may move beyond painful memories and fears. They may begin communicating what they actually need. Instead of disappearing, they might ask for reassurance, comfort, understanding, or simply some space. For someone who survived by keeping everything inside, that can be a major turning point. Revealing their emotional world can become one of their strongest expressions of trust. It's almost as if they're saying, "I'm letting you see what I normally keep hidden." That is where guarded affection can begin becoming genuine intimacy. Their love doesn't have to be demonstrated through dramatic gestures. Sometimes one of their strongest expressions of love is simply telling you the truth. Showing you their inner struggle isn't necessarily weakness. In many cases, it is evidence that they've become strong enough to stop hiding. They may not want you to solve everything for them. They may simply want you to understand what they're carrying. And when you respond by remaining present, rather than trying to control or fix them, the relationship can gradually feel less like a battlefield and more like a safe place to rest. Another meaningful sign of deepening love appears when an avoidant begins protecting the relationship instead of only protecting themselves. For a long time, their instinct may have been centered around self-preservation, protecting their independence, avoiding dependence, maintaining emotional control, and creating distance before vulnerability became too uncomfortable. Love can be attractive while also feeling dangerous. It offers warmth and closeness, but it also creates the possibility of loss, disappointment, betrayal, or feeling trapped. So, when an avoidant begins protecting the relationship itself, it shows that something inside them has shifted. The connection is no longer simply something that might hurt them. It has become something valuable enough to protect. Earlier in the relationship, conflict may have triggered withdrawal. Silence might have felt easier than explaining themselves. Distance may have seemed safer than sitting through difficult emotions. But as their feelings deepen, they may begin staying even when things become uncomfortable. They may still need time to process. They may not suddenly become perfect communicators. But instead of abandoning the relationship whenever emotions become difficult, They begin searching for ways to repair what has been damaged. That movement from escaping to repairing is enormous. It means the relationship has become more important than their automatic urge to withdraw. They also begin considering your emotional experience rather than focusing exclusively on protecting their own boundaries. They may think more carefully before reacting. They become more aware of how their actions affect you. They begin recognizing that protecting their own peace shouldn't require destroying yours. Love slowly shifts from self-preservation toward mutual care. This doesn't happen because they suddenly become an entirely different person. It develops through repeated experiences. They notice your patience. They recognize that you can respect their independence without controlling them. They experience a form of love that doesn't demand they abandon themselves. And eventually, they may begin offering that same sense of safety back to you in their own way. You might notice them responding differently to emotional triggers. When overwhelmed, they may still need time alone, but instead of disappearing without explanation, they tell you that they need some space. When conflict happens, they may still feel uncomfortable, but they begin making an effort to work through the issue rather than simply walking away. Their actions begin communicating something they may struggle to say directly. I don't want to lose what we have. That is emotional growth. They're learning that staying connected doesn't automatically mean giving up their freedom. In fact, a healthy relationship can make independence more meaningful because they're choosing connection freely rather than being forced into it. Protecting the relationship becomes their quiet form of commitment. They may not casually promise forever, but their behavior begins moving in that direction. They show up when it matters. They consider how important decisions affect both people. They make space for the relationship in their future. When misunderstandings happen, they care enough to preserve what exists between you. From the outside, these actions may seem ordinary. For someone whose instinct was once to stand alone, they can mean everything. Deep love can be frightening for an avoidant because caring deeply also creates the possibility of being hurt. Yet when they continue choosing the relationship despite that fear, they're making a conscious decision that the connection is worth the risk. That is emotional maturity. They're no longer simply trying to survive love. They're learning how to build a life within it. When an avoidant begins protecting the relationship, they've started moving from isolation toward inclusion. They aren't only guarding their heart from you anymore. They're learning how to protect the bond alongside you. That quiet devotion may not be obvious to everyone watching from the outside, but the person experiencing it can feel the difference. Their effort becomes steadier. Their care becomes more intentional. Their presence becomes more dependable. What once frightened them becomes something they're willing to defend. Avoidant love rarely looks like a constant stream of dramatic words, overwhelming affection, or movie-like romance. It's often quieter, more grounded, and much harder to recognize unless you understand what their behavior is communicating. For someone with avoidant patterns, love can exist inside the tension between wanting closeness and fearing it. They may spend years believing that emotional dependence is dangerous, so when they finally allow themselves to remain, that choice can carry a significance that other people may never fully understand. Their love may not look perfect from the outside, but when it becomes more secure, it can become deeply rooted because it is built through consistency rather than performance. Avoidant people often rely on emotional control and personal distance because those strategies make them feel safe. Their fear of dependence doesn't necessarily mean they lack strong emotions. Sometimes it means those emotions are more powerful than they know how to manage. And when they genuinely fall for someone, that carefully controlled inner world begins to change. They start caring more than they expected. They feel more deeply than they're comfortable admitting. They think about you during moments when they once would have focused only on themselves. Slowly, almost without realizing it, the person who once believed they were safest alone begins discovering another form of safety: being understood, being accepted, choosing to remain. Even when an avoidant feels something deeply, they may struggle to express it through words. Their emotions often become visible through consistency instead. They might not constantly tell you how much you mean to them, but when you truly need them, they show up. They may not shower you with affection every day, yet they remember the small things that make you comfortable, the situations that overwhelm you, and the details that matter to you. For them, deep love can mean gradually creating space for you inside a life they once kept almost completely private. You may notice it through subtle changes they make without drawing attention to them. Their routines begin naturally making room for you. You become part of their everyday life without them needing to make a dramatic announcement about it. You may also notice that silence feels different around them. They can sit beside you without feeling compelled to escape, explain themselves, or fill every quiet moment with conversation. Your presence stops feeling intrusive. It begins feeling peaceful. For someone who once depended on distance to feel secure, that is a profound change. Their love isn't necessarily about constantly proving how much they care. It's about preserving what has been built between you. Instead of chasing emotional highs, they begin appreciating the calm that comes from having someone trustworthy beside them. Their way of saying, "I'm here," may never come through a dramatic confession. It may simply be the fact that they keep showing up. When an avoidant genuinely sees you as someone they want in their life long term, their devotion may be hidden inside ordinary behavior. They may not make enormous promises about the future, but they continue making small choices that strengthen the relationship. Because they understand the importance of personal space themselves, they may also become respectful of your need for solitude. They don't necessarily want to create unnecessary emotional chaos, because peace has become one of the ways they understand love. They may make decisions that protect the stability of the relationship, even when they can't fully explain why those choices matter. Sometimes this kind of loyalty can even be mistaken for emotional distance. But there is an important difference between being emotionally unavailable and expressing affection quietly. An avoidant who is genuinely invested may not constantly seek reassurance or attention. They may feel secure simply knowing that the connection exists and remains stable. Their love can also be highly reflective. They may think before acting, process emotions privately, and speak only after they've had time to understand what they feel. They often care more about what is genuine than what appears romantic from the outside. They would rather have something authentic than something impressive. The deepest love from an avoidant may never arrive through grand promises. It appears in the quiet decision to stay, trust, and let you closer. When distance slowly becomes presence, silence becomes honesty, and self-protection becomes mutual care, you are witnessing something truly meaningful. They are no longer choosing love only when it feels easy. They are choosing it even when vulnerability feels frightening. And when an avoidant finally learns that love can feel like freedom instead of a cage, their quiet decision to remain can become one of the most powerful expressions of devotion.